Welcome back to the Beauty Lab podcast. I'm your host, Velia, and this is my co-host, Monina. And today we have a pelvic floor expert, Maureen Wenski, with us. And we're so excited to interview her because all of a sudden I'm hearing nothing but pelvic floor this and pelvic floor that. And I don't know if it's because we're all getting more aware or if it's that, exactly, getting to that age where pelvic floor is more a topic in our lives. But I'm excited to hear all about what Maureen has to say about the subject. Welcome to the Beauty Lab podcast, your drive time resource for all things beauty, health, and wellness. We're your hosts and favorite beauty nerds, Monina and Velia.
Join us as we debunk myths, explore the latest trends, and dive deep into the science behind your favorite products. We'll interview industry experts and answer your burning beauty questions in 30 minutes or less.
So, Maureen, thank you for coming and being here with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, ladies.
So can you give us a brief explanation of your background and how that led you to become a pelvic floor physical therapist?
Yes, so let's see. It's kind of scary, but I graduated from college now, so from grad school for physical therapy about 25 years ago. So it's been a long time, maybe 24 years. But I had a tiny little experience. It was like a side note. So this tells you how unimportant women's health was back 20-something years ago. So I had a tiny little experience, and they just had a physical therapist come in and they explained what the pelvic floor was. And it was so short and was so glossed over that when I got to the real world and I started practicing, I had more questions than I had answers. Mm-hmm. And so that was always on the back of my mind. But I paused on that because I thought I was going to be a trainer for the Niners. Like, that's what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to be the first female trainer. And anyways, life happens, right? And then that door I realized that door was not going to be open for me. So I thought, okay, so what is it that I really cared about? And so I pursued some different classes, some different courses about women's health. I was curious, probably because at that point too, I'm thinking about pregnancy for myself. I wanted those questions answered too, and people just couldn't answer my questions. Why am I having back pain? Why can I not walk? I'm 20 weeks into my pregnancy, and now I'm 24 weeks, and I'm walking fine, but now at 28 weeks, I can't walk. So all of these questions just started, to confuse me, and I just had, again, more questions and answers. And then I paused on that I promise I'll get to the answer here, but I paused on that too with all these curiosities, and it wasn't until I got into orthopedics, so in physical therapy, I was practicing more traditional stuff like back pain, hip issues, those sort of traditional neck pain, for example. And it was an oncologist who referred a patient to me post breast cancer. And that person, I remember her, she was very special, but she had breast cancer and she ended up with a frozen shoulder and neck issues, headaches. And so we worked together for a long time. Things improved at that point for her from a shoulder function perspective. And then it was the oncologist who said to me, I've got some other oncologists who have a lot of questions about the pelvic floor. And then that's when I started asking more questions. I pursued more courses, and a number of years later, I'm now a full-time physical therapist, and I've got a caseload that, people will have a referral that comes through, and I can't see them for 6 to 8 weeks. It's just that inundated, and there's such a high need. So that's my long journey.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So does that mean that your field, there really isn't a lot of people who are trained in this
100%.
part? Okay.
You've got it. It is. I'm hidden. It's hard to. I'm in a system where it takes not a PCP, but you have to get to a specialist to then get to me. So there's one barrier there.
Okay.
And sometimes the pelvic floor can get hidden in other areas, like, is this a digestive issue? Is this menopause? Is this just bad eating habits? It's just because you're overweight. So a patient, a woman, can get pulled into this very circuitous route before they can actually get to pelvic floor PT. So many barriers in front of them. and also just not that many providers that exist.
Right. So not only are there not enough providers, but like you're saying, people don't even understand that this could be the reason why they're having whatever issues that they're having. So it sounds like even the specialists and the doctors who are the barriers before coming to you, they almost have to understand that it could possibly be a pelvic floor issue.
Right.
Too, because they're the ones that are going to be referring to you as well. Wow.
You've got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have another specific question then. Let's see here. What is our pelvic floor? For people who don't really, because a lot of people don't really know what this is, because I really didn't understand a lot of it either until you started talking more about it too. So what is our pelvic floor and what role does it play in our health? And specifically for longevity. That's my question.
Okay. I'll probably ask you to repeat that question in a second, but let's start because it's such a loaded question. There's so many parts to it.
Sure.
But with a pelvic floor, everybody has one. Male, female, everybody's got a pelvic floor. So what it is a collection of muscles. So like right now, if you were, or if your members are to act as though they are stopping the flow of urine, right? I know that sounds very strange. And I talk about these things like it's no big deal because I really talk about these things like it's no big deal. But if you were to act right now as though you were in an elevator, you just had a large meal, for example, and you're just starting to feel the impact of bloating and digestion, and you're like, oh my gosh, this elevator is very full, and I don't want to pass any gas. So like, what would you do, right? Like in this moment, right? If I create that image for you, it's very easy for somebody to say, I'm clenching, I'm tightening. Well, what you've done right there is you've tightened or engaged your pelvic floor. So the pelvic floor is a series of muscles, overlapping muscles and muscles that are all kind of embedded into each other, that when they contract, they shorten, they tighten, and then they also lift. So their functions are they have a lot of functions in your life, but the typical functions we think about are stopping the flow of urine, like when you're not ready to use the bathroom just yet. So stopping the flow of urine or holding urine, same thing with gas, same thing with stool or bowel. And these muscles also have a stability function to them too. So they interact, like when somebody thinks about the core, oftentimes they're thinking about the abdomen wall, but it's so much more than that. It is the abdomen wall, which has a number of layers to it too. It is the pelvic floor, which has a number of layers to it too. It's the back. It's in some way some of the deep glute or buttock muscles. It is your diaphragm. So the pelvic floor itself never ever acts by itself. It relies on the relationship with the abdomen, with the diaphragm. It's influenced. So it's influenced by all these other muscles, and they work together as a team. And so that's, they're a series of muscles. But not only are they, when we think about muscles like contracting and relaxing, there's also nerve involved into it. There's also blood vessels, both in and out in it. And there's fascial connections. There's tendinous, ligamentous type of structures too. So it's never just that one muscle ends. It's embedded into a whole other system.
Wow. Okay, so the pelvic floor, because in my mind, when you say pelvic floor, I just think that one area.
Just the bottom,
yeah,
right?
Just the bottom, but you're saying it has to do with your diaphragm and so many other interlying muscles and other, maybe even affecting other organs, like holding a lot of things in, it sounds like too.
Absolutely. Like I was saying earlier, there's a stability. Maybe I didn't mention it, but it also has that stability function to it too.
Yes, you did mention
so
that.
You're right. They're, from front to back, one of its jobs is to hold in position the bladder, the rectum, the bladder, the vaginal canal, and then the uterus above it, and then also behind it, the rectum too. So it holds, it acts like a little bit of a hammock in some way.
Like shock absorbers.
Like shock absorber. You've got it.
Like shock absorbers for like when you jump, or like when and you're having to hold in, like not peeing, or like when you're coughing. It's like the shock absorbers, right?
Exactly. Yes. And so again, it controls urine, it controls bowel movements, it controls holding them when you're doing something more strenuous.
Right.
It's got that stabilizing function to it. It has a sexual function to it as well.
Okay.
And then to answer the other part of your question, that deeper part of that question too, about longevity and one, as a pelvic PT, you can almost say it's embedded into every system in your body. So like the urinary system, we talked a little bit about that. Let's just play this out for a second. If somebody is not able to hold onto urine, as you might have, and let's say in your 20s and 30s before you've had multiple babies, if somebody has an incontinence issue and it's recurrent, it could lead to something like UTIs, and that can have an impact on your bladder and your kidneys. So there's an important function there for bladder health. And then also, not to mention, if somebody's leaking urine, it's a really distressing thing. It really, especially as somebody gets a little bit older, lives can oftentimes get smaller and smaller, and you become fearful of doing social things or leaving the home in some extreme cases. And if that's urine, imagine how small that world becomes with moving bowels if there's leakage there. Right. But talking about bowel movements and longevity there's a huge component when it comes to pelvic floor functioning correctly and bowel movements. When all things are moving really well and somebody can feel the urge and they can thoughtfully make it to the bathroom and they can release as they need, like these all sound like very, very simple issue, like a simple thing that we just take for granted, but it doesn't work like that for many, right? They have a constant issue with slow motility, meaning, in health, there's a range for moving your bowels as far as how frequently people will go. So there's a range, it's anywhere between multiple times a day and then also 3 to 5 times per week, for example. For some, they're not moving their bowels on a daily basis. Sometimes they're waiting upwards of every 5 days, every 7 days. And that just wreaks a lot of havoc on the GI system. So when somebody is able to move their bowels on a regular basis, they have this benefit of an incredible amount of serotonin and dopamine, and for some, endorphins. They're just these feel-good hormones in your system. Not only do they make you feel good, but they also help you with just the feeling of wellness, the feeling of well-being. And part of that is it's stimulation on the vagal nerve. So the vagal nerve, it's a cranial nerve. So you have a lot of cranial nerves that start in your brain. I know this is getting a little bit technical, but I think once we get there, you're going to be like, oh my gosh.
Well, because we talk a lot about the gut-brain axis a lot, and it sounds like this is the same thing.
This is 100%. This is like the physiology of it. But your vagal nerve starts in the brain, and it's this wandering nerve. That's what it means, and it has a lot of different stops. Some stops include the heart. So when the vagal nerve is operating correctly, it slows the heart rate down, right? So when the opposing part of the nervous system, when you've got some stress, oftentimes the heart rate will increase. But when the vagal nerve is at peace and when it's stimulated, the heart rate can slow down. So other stops are, also I mentioned the heart, but also the diaphragm, so it can have a role in how fast you're breathing. So like, let's think about the opposite. Like when you're under stress, how shallow your breath, how fast, how frenetic your breath might feel. And that can also work the other way. It makes you feel anxious. It makes you feel stressed. It might make you feel just sort of escalated and elevated. When the vagal nerve is stimulated, it slows that heart rate down. It slows that breath rate down, which means your blood pressure is reduced. If we keep going forward with this, it means that digestion is moving efficiently. It means you're having regular bowel movements. It means muscle tension is also reduced. So when somebody is not moving their bowels, when your pelvic floor is, let's say, not functioning correctly, if it's tense, if it's taut, if somebody doesn't have a good connection to their pelvic floor, it can back up not only their gut, but all those things I mentioned, right? What's the end result on their heart rate? What's the end result on their breath rate? What is the end result on their blood pressure? And all of those things have a huge impact in how you think, how you feel in general.
Right.
So one can just even say, look, what system is not impacted by the pelvic floor?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a whole
That was a
journey.
lot, sorry.
A whole anatomy journey, but it's true. And going back to what you said earlier about how, in order for a patient to find their way to you, they have to go through all of these other, like, a whole journey to get to you, like from doctor to doctor to doctor.
Right.
And I have my own personal experience with that as well, which is how I even knew that you were a pelvic floor physical therapist, because we were talking about it one day and I was like, I was just referred to a pelvic floor physical therapist. And that was a whole thing for me. I've had several abdominal surgeries, and so much happens when they cut your abdominal muscles open, and then they mess around with your intestines, and they mess around with your, everything in there. And if you have any, and I wound up having internal bleeding, and that messed around with my pelvic floor. And that was the first time I ever even heard the term pelvic floor.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what they were talking about. Like, they didn't really go into detail. But I'll tell you this, for 17 years, I have been feeling the effects of a surgery that I had 17 years ago.
Absolutely.
That really, really damaged my pelvic floor. And long story short, after seeing doctor after doctor after doctor for this reoccurring pain that I've had, and them thinking it was all these other things, and doing CAT scans and MRIs, and I kept saying, I feel like this is muscular. And then, of course, they just want to give you muscle relaxers.
Right.
My gynecologist, after all this, just coincidentally was doing an exam, like your regular exam. And she was like, how they do, and they're like pushing in different places, and they're like, does this hurt? Does this hurt? And I'm like, kinda.
Right.
And she was like, I'm going to refer you to a pelvic floor physical therapist. And it was very, like, matter of fact. Like, it was very, like, just...
She noticed
Yeah.
that there was definitely something.
And I was just kind of like, what, huh?
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, you're a little tight. And so I was telling my husband about that. And he was like, so your gynecologist told you that you were too tight? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, did she tell you were too pretty too? Oh, and I was like, no, that's not the kind of tight she was talking about.
Right.
There's a lot of muscles in there to check. And that's not what I meant.
Is tight a bad thing?
Yeah.
It's like, how is this? Right.
Exactly.
And here's what I'll say. Some iteration of your story is, it's something that I hear all the time. It's something that that happened years ago, and I thought about it and I felt it, but it's not showing itself until now. And here's how it looks, right? So one thing I'll say about the pelvic floor is it is 100% musculoskeletally, chemically, hormonally, neurologically protective of you. Like, I say this so many times during the day. And so if there is a disruption to the abdomen wall, right, the pelvic floor comes to rescue. And unlike, let's say, if you had a surgery to the shoulder, the neck muscles will come to protect. They'll almost go into a spasm. That's a nice way to describe it, a spasm, so that that's its reminder to say, don't move me for a little bit. I need to heal a little bit. The pelvic floor will do something very similar. If there is a disruption to the abdomen wall, it will protect. Unlike the neck, where you just start moving your head, you start moving your jaw, you're constantly reminded to look this way, look that way. And at some point you have to use your hands, and then your elbow, and then your shoulder. The shoulder eventually starts to rest, relax, and then starts to move. Probably with some guidance with a physical therapist, sure. But with the pelvic floor, oftentimes, it will start to brace, guard, and there isn't that constant reminder to move it. Because number one, your body will find a way to release urine. It will find a way. Even if you have to strain and push, you will find a way. And then your brain starts to realize, I guess that's just how it's going to be. You start to compensate and accept it. And until you reach, let's just kind of fast forward this a little bit. For example, I've been straining, I've been pushing, I've been even dealing with pain with intercourse, and we've just been kind of working around it. But now I'm dealing with a significant prolapse, right? That's what sends somebody to pelvic PT. And then we start uncovering, peeling all these layers back, and then we had, for example, a C-section or a surgery.
So it just made me think. So like in her case, so if somebody's been dealing with something for a long time, maybe it's a chronic thing.
Yeah.
It may be a pelvic floor issue, and it's never occurred to their doctor or their gynecologist, whoever else that they've been to.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that can happen. Absolutely.
Okay. So it also sounds like it's not a one thing that can cause pelvic floor issues. It sounds like it's a big array of things that can cause.
It's usually it's usually multifactorial.
Multifactorial.
You've got it. So
Wow.
let's say it started with the thing, right? And yours was a surgery. It could have been, let's say, a GI issue, somebody who's dealing with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, somebody who dealt with a UTI, and then another UTI, and then another UTI, right? Just for whatever reason, they were just recurrent UTIs. And then let's say they grew out of it, right? Or somebody who was dealing with, I slipped and fell, I was on some ice, I slipped, and now I had a pelvic fracture, right? So sometimes they can start with some level of controlled trauma or trauma, and then on top of that, another thing happened. High stress, sedentary job, I'm not active, I'm not moving. I had a bout of constipation, my eating habits did change, and now I am dealing with constipation. These things just start to layer and layer and layer on top of each other. And here's the thing, this is one muscle that, if we come back to that first question, has a lot of different functions in your life.
Wow.
So, it gets pretty hidden.
Yeah. I think I need to see you because I'm starting to feel like, maybe that's why I have the lower back issue. Maybe that's why my hips hurt. Maybe that's why it's so hard to get out of bed in the morning. Maybe I do have some pelvic floor issues that I had no idea was even causing.
So on that note, what kind of conditions does pelvic floor physical therapy help treat?
Yeah, and so I know I listed a number of them already, and now people are probably like, oh my gosh, do I have that?
Yeah, that was
No,
me,
I don't want
yeah.
to diagnose anybody with anything, but let's just start with like some I guess, not traditional, but mainstream things that people might think I'm dealing with a little bit of this and it's no big deal. But urinary incontinence. And I would say that's a huge part of my caseload.
That's the one that I think of when people say they have pelvic floor issues. I think of that.
Right.
Usually.
Coughing, sneezing, laughing. Whenever I do any of those things, I leak a little bit. For some people, it's doing something like I'm running, and I do fine in that first little bit of my run, but towards the end of my run, I really start to saturate a pad, right? So urinary leakage. Or maybe it could be something in the same area like leakage, but it looks a little bit differently, like urgency and frequency, urinary urgency and frequency. So like if you're thinking, okay, I used to have this window of confidently 3 hours, and now it's just kind of shrinking down to 2 hours, and I'm dealing with it. I just urinate a little bit more frequently, no big deal. But now it's kind of creeping up to every hour, and now I have to really work to not go to the bathroom all the time. It's kind of on the back of my mind. We call that urgency and frequency. And sometimes it leads to leakage, sometimes it doesn't. So that could be a pelvic floor issue. Again, a lot of times it's multifactorial. There could be some bladder irritants that person might be taking in, sensitizing their bladder a little bit more. Or it could be that somebody is, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but not drinking enough water. So when the concentration of urine is high inside the bladder, it creates a lot of noise inside the bladder. So it could be a hydration issue. So urinary issues, defecation issues, or bowel movement issues. So constipation, I mentioned a little bit earlier, fecal incontinence. So there could be a stress incontinence, or it could be like an urge incontinence too, that anytime I just feel even just a hint of urge, I have a tiny little window that is just getting smaller and smaller, and I am trying to make it to the bathroom, and I sometimes don't make it, right? So bowel incontinence is another thing. I think another big part of my caseload is prolapse. So all that means is coming back to the pelvic floor and its stability function. It holds a number of very important organs in place. The pelvic floor doesn't do that by itself. There are also fascial and connective tissue connections that suspend these organs in position. But sometimes with age and overweightness, weightedness, and repetitive strain, and people on their feet for long periods of time, that connective tissue gets thinner and it gets a little bit weaker. So now the load on the pelvic floor is much higher. Sometimes the load just sort of surpasses what it can do. So now we have what's called a little bit of bulging. And so that just means the organs, they're not going to fall out, people. Okay, let me just say that, because I know everybody's going to be knocking on their OBGYN. Okay, then OBGYNs are going to get mad at me. But it just means there might just be pressure, that sensation of pressure that just wasn't there before, right? Or maybe it's that they do feel a little bit of bulging that just didn't, vaginal bulging, that just might not have been there before, okay? It is something, I don't want to leave anybody with a fear now. There are things we can do, right? Yeah. There's ways to help and fix this. But other issues that I deal with, I've been talking a lot about weakness here. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, which a lot of people don't know about or talk about, is tension, muscle tightness. I described the pelvic floor as a series of muscles. So it can do just like any other muscles in that they can become tight. Yeah. They can have trigger points. They can have tender points. They can have knots and bands, just like, say, your upper trap does if you're on the computer for too long a time. And what that can amount to is pain. So when there are trigger points, tender points in the pelvic floor, sometimes they can be pain just there in the pelvic floor, or somebody might have even a referral pattern. Mm-hmm. So coming back to what you were mentioning earlier, sometimes trigger points or bands or tense areas in the pelvic floor can present themselves as lower quadrant pain, abdominal pain, even central, sort of around the umbilicus or belly button pain. It can have referral patterns into the lower back. Same thing into the groin and into the hips too. Right. Yeah. And then the other area of my caseload, coming back to tension and tightness, is pain with intercourse. That's a really big one. Okay. It's not just something that happens with menopausal or postmenopausal women. It can actually happen in those who are just starting to experiment with intercourse. So you can see that could have a huge impact on relationships and intimacy, and thinking that it's going to impair their ability to have a family. Right. That sort of thing.
Wow. There's so much. We may need you to come back.
I know.
There's so much to cover, but we do have a few more questions for you. But before we do that, if you guys are enjoying this episode, or you think of someone, or you think of yourself, but someone who may be experiencing a lot of the things that Maureen was talking about today, please share this episode with them. And if you like what you're hearing and you value what we bring to you every week, please like, share, and subscribe. Really, really appreciate that. Okay. So my question then is, now that we kind of know what types of things you see, I know everyone's heard of this, so certain exercises, right? Please tell me, is a pelvic floor exercise the same as Kegels?
Okay, good question. A Kegel is a type of pelvic floor exercise. It's one way that we oftentimes will have people do to strengthen their pelvic floor, but it does so much more than that. It is a way we teach how to coordinate. It is another way we teach people what their pelvic floor does do or doesn't do, which is to help control pressure. So we can practice one right now if you guys are up for it. Okay. Absolutely. So what I want you guys to do first and foremost is fix your postures. Not that you were slouching or anything like that, but imagine there is a string at the top of your head and you're just sort of sitting up tall. Now in this moment, release the pelvic floor. Try not to act as though you're stopping the flow of urine or gas. Okay, same thing with the abdomen wall. Let it go for now. I just want everybody to be available. Okay, and then I know this sounds really weird, but go ahead and feel your breath. Feel yourself inhale, and then feel yourself exhale. So how I like to do a Kegel, if we're really looking at this as strengthening or coordination, is stay relaxed. Inhale. As you exhale, stop the flow of urine. As you inhale, start the process of letting go. As you exhale, last time, stop the flow of urine. And as you inhale, let it go. So in that moment, that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in that moment, what you just did is you strengthened the brain's connection to the pelvic floor. So a Kegel or a pelvic floor contraction is a really nice way to build connection, and it's also a really nice way to strengthen the pelvic floor. So I don't want anybody to think that if you just do 1,000 Kegels, I'm going to have the best strength ever, right? That's not really how it works, because that's not how the pelvic floor works. It never just contracts on its own. It is, and I think I mentioned this earlier, it's influenced by the diaphragm, the back, the hips. So how I like to think, if weakness is the issue, how I typically do a Kegel, once I know they can do it correctly, right? Once they really feel like that exercise that you just did right there, they're like, Maureen, I got it. I've got this. I know how to let go. I can feel it. I can contract. I feel it. Then I hide it in something, right? So a typical exercise, and we might all know, like the bridge, for example. It's a typical exercise that we might do for butt strengthening or for back strengthening or even for abdominal strengthening. So I might have somebody do a pelvic floor contraction while they do a bridge. So it gets a little bit more complicated, right? We're trying to add layers because that's how the pelvic floor does. It essentially is first to the scene when I'm doing something strenuous. In that moment, that was a bridge. But like if I'm getting off of this chair, if I'm hinging forward, my pelvic floor is, in some way, it's like, oh, here she goes. She's hinging forward. She's hinging forward. The pelvic floor contracts. And then as I push off my legs, it stays contracted. And somewhere along that sit to stand, it's starting to release. So it's coordinating with an effortful movement. Yeah. But I also don't want people to think that strengthening is the only tool that pelvic floor PTs have. There are countless, if we go to the other end of the spectrum, typically for those patients who are dealing with a pain component, tension, tightness, constipation, and in some ways prolapse. I'd mentioned earlier that it's typically an issue of weakness, but it could also be an issue of tension and tightness too, okay? But if we've identified that there is tension and tightness, muscle shortness in the pelvic floor relaxation exercises is the way there. And that can be anything from things like, for example, cat and cow movements that you might have seen with yoga. It could mean child's pose, which you might have seen in yoga as well. But it could also mean some very specific diaphragm breaths or breathing strategies to help release. I like to describe it almost like a massage to the pelvic floor to help relax the pelvic floor or lengthen the pelvic floor.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I just kind of thought of something as we're doing the exercises ourselves. So a lot of people listen to this podcast, not necessarily watch it. And a lot of times they're driving while they're listening to it.
Right.
So when I'm driving in the Bay Area, I am like super tense and I am like clenched everywhere. Like my hands, my hips, I feel like my jaw is clenched. So I'm sure like my pelvic floor is just, doing
tight as
you got it. Not always a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
right.
Could you kind of recommend, if someone's listening to this while they're driving,
Very nice. Yeah.
Can you kind of address that a little bit? Like even just awareness wise.
Yeah, such a good question because we typically don't think about the pelvic floor in these terms.
Because it's so stressful to drive, especially in the freeways in the Bay Area and traffic and everything. So.
And if we come back to that comment I made earlier about how the pelvic floor is so protective of you.
Yes.
You almost sort of think of like a puppy and that there's like a loud noise behind that puppy. What do you see its tail do?
Right.
Right? So same thing, if I'm driving and I'm not feeling safe, the ground is slick, I've got an unsafe driver who's weaving and I'm just a little bit nervous, or just tension, right? It's a stressed environment, any of those things. The pelvic floor, it never acts, I've sort of said this earlier too, that it never just acts by itself, right? So if you're finding that I'm gripping the wheel like this, I'm clenching my jaw, oftentimes the pelvic floor is following, and probably some other things, breath holding, chest tightness, abdomen tightness. You might even find that the inner thighs are squeezing too. The buttocks are oftentimes clenching. So if you know that I have, if you're just now starting to become aware of this, you're starting to now think, oh my gosh, am I somebody who's ignoring my pelvic floor? Is there a way to start building or opening my awareness? First, I wouldn't go straight to the pelvic floor, right? I wouldn't say just like, hey man, release, right? Because it doesn't work like that. It's not just, it's part of the full pattern. I often tell people, I call this a body scan, not just me. This is coined by a psychologist and a lot of mental health therapists too, but a body scan. They can last 3 seconds or they can last minutes, if not longer. But I go from the top of my head and I work my way all the way down. So I'm looking like, am I furrowing my eyebrows? Am I clenching my jaw? Am I pursing my lips? Am I bringing my shoulders up towards my ears, right? I go all the way down. If I keep following down, like, is my abdomen released? Are my thighs heavy and relaxed? And then I go to my pelvic floor. So I travel all the way down and then I invite. You're basically giving your pelvic floor permission to release. Right? Because it's really difficult to be tense in one area and very relaxed in another. Just as it's hard to release one area if you're tense up higher in the chain. So I start from the top in an organized way. I find a flow. I try not to linger in one area. I try just to kind of rhythmically go all the way down and then invite my pelvic floor to release. And the more you do this, the more you bring awareness to it, you then can address it, right? We can't fix anything unless you're aware of it, right? Aware of the issue. Yeah.
Well, I like that you called it scanning yourself because, like you just said, the reason why it's probably in protective mode is because something else is going on.
You got it.
So if you can figure out where you can pinpoint where the problem is, then your pelvic will probably then go, okay, we're fine now. We can release or whatever. Is that correct?
Yes, you got it. Yeah.
Wow.
And you start to, as you start to kind of play with these body scans, you start to see things on repeat, right?
Yeah.
You start to see things on repeat. And I oftentimes, again, kind of dealing with some really complex cases here, and I'll work with other therapists. Perhaps my patient is working with not just myself for their pelvic floor issue, but they might be dealing with another issue. For example, migraines and headaches. Okay, that's a big one. There's, for whatever reason, is this dual issue that can happen with patients who are dealing with pelvic floor issues. And so I'll have them go through these body scans and they'll start to see that every time I'm clenching my jaw, I am clenching my pelvic floor and vice versa. Or even longer down the road, the more they've started to release their pelvic floor, gosh, did that do something for my headaches or am I imagining this? Right, yeah.
Just also interconnected. Like
Very interconnected,
your body, I mean, the way you explain it now, it's almost like your body is like fine-tuned, like orchestra. Like everything needs to be in tune to make sure everything's working
You've got
together.
it.
So
One brain who governs it all, right? One body who is
That's
under.
awesome. And it's like your conductor and then all the instruments.
I
And the
like that
symphony.
analogy better actually than the governor.
But wow, no, this was amazing. So much. I didn't realize. I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
Today.
Yes, yeah.
So much. So
Well, yeah, and that's kind of been the theme of even just the whole topic of pelvic floors. It's like we don't know what we don't know exists to help us. We just sort of depend on our doctors to kind of guide us in the right directions.
Right.
So, with that said, how do you know if you would benefit from pelvic floor physical therapy for someone who maybe is listening to this and going, oh, I do that. Oh, I'm feeling this. Oh, so in that case, if you're thinking about all of the things we've been talking about today and you think you might want to check out a pelvic floor physical therapist or ask your doctor about it, is it just going to your doctor and talking to them about it? Or
First, I would say do your homework, meaning track your symptoms. Like what's happening, right? Do a little bit of an investigation with yourself. And what I mean by that is if I'm leaking, because the more information you can gather, the better your doctor and your physical therapist later down the road can help you. And if you're doing all this investigation, you're like, I can't figure out the rhythm, I can't figure out the pattern, that's okay too. Bring that to the table. But if you are able to, and you're starting to identify patterns, jot it down. Like if I eat these things, man, this is when I tend to leak. Or if I'm doing these activities, this is when I tend to leak. Or if it's a symptom like pain, if I do these activities, here's pain. Or if it's something a little bit different, like whenever I'm in high stress, and that seems to coincide with my pain. Track these different symptoms, whether they feel related or not related, okay? And it's really nice, because if you start to see your own data and you're like, oh my gosh, every time I'm starting to see these patterns, then that also gives you permission to say, what if it is stress related, what can I do in this moment to at least pace myself a little bit differently? I mean, we can't just get rid of stress, right? That's not how the world works around here. But can I pace it a little bit differently? Where can I embed a rest break in my day? That sort of thing.
Or take a short vacation.
Or take a short vacation, yes, if you can do that. But a tracking system, your own investigation, and then also function. So it's urinary issues, defecation issues. That's a real easy way to kind of land with a physical therapist. But also pain issues too. Like if you're in menstruating age and you're just like, gosh, all my friends have no issues inserting a tampon, and I can never go swimming, for example, right? When I'm on my period because I can't insert a tampon. Or I've been postponing going to my OBGYN because it's such a painful issue for me that, not on purpose I'm avoiding her, but I just tend to avoid going to the doctors because it's an issue. If you're constipated, that's another issue. Sometimes we think, well, it's just because I'm not moving enough. Well, let me figure out which movement that would work well for you. Let me help you with that. Or they might just think it's just a fiber issue. Let me eat more fiber. It's not always just a fiber issue. It could also be a pelvic floor issue.
Or lead to pelvic floor issues.
Or lead to, or be multifactorial,
Yeah.
right? Oftentimes, for example, a person dealing with constipation, okay, I'm knocking on the door of their nutritionist. I'm working with their OB. I'm wondering, when was their colonoscopy and what were those results? I'm talking to their PCP and just looking at them as overall, are they dealing with, for example, diabetes? Where are we in their overall health that might impact where they are hormonally and therefore digestively and therefore pelvic floor wise? So,
Was there anything that maybe we didn't ask you that you think is really relevant that you want to say?
sometimes what I find myself saying, especially when people come into my office and they're now in their 50s and 60s and 70s, oftentimes what I find myself thinking is what I would have said to their 20 and 30 and 40-year-old selves, right? And it really, truly is become aware, right? Oftentimes in our 20s, 30s, and 40s, we're trying to do all the things. We're trying to get stronger. We're doing Pilates. We're doing HIIT classes. And I would say, like, stop for a moment and think about how to, like, be kind to your pelvic floor. So it might mean meditation. It might mean yoga. It might mean doing some sort of mindfulness exercise, which could involve movement or might not, right? But I would say just sort of erring on the side of gentleness and kindness and slowing things down for just a moment to just kind of get a beat on what your pelvic floor and your body's feeling.
And that's what we really talk about a lot, is just self-care. And that's why we like to bring experts like you here, because it's stuff that we may not even think about as self-care. And I definitely thank you. This was really, like, so much information, but now, yeah, I think I'm going to do the scanning. I think that's really going to help a lot. But I just want to say thank you so much for being here. And thank you, all of you, for hanging out with us and taking the time to listen. And we just hope you enjoyed what you heard. And again, please like, share, subscribe. I'm Monina.
I'm Velia.
I'm Maureen.
Until next time.
Don't ignore your pelvic floor. The answer is no.
Okay.
Blooper. Okay.
Should I just do the whole thank you?
I totally. What did you
I just started going, wait, what do we say? One more. Take 3.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Cool.
But yeah, you were.
Feel bad.
No. Check, check.
All right.
Check, check.
Now I'm all paranoid. Testing. Jen was like, I feel like how we're talking about you. She was like, you have to put the microphone on the side that you're looking towards because I can't hear you.
You sure can. Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Okay. Ready? Yeah. Ready? Are we ready? Ready. Smile. Pretty. Sorry.
Is this going in the bloopers?
Yeah. Monina's alarms. Again.
Live.
We can have a whole Monina's alarms blooper reel.
Hold on tight.
It's true. It's totally fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Blooper.
I'm Monina.
I'm Velia.
I'm Maureen.
Okay, let me try again.
Yeah, let's do that again.
No worries. Something to. All right.